Around a year and a half ago during the summer, I remember I was on a plane to New York, going to attend some kind of summer camp that my parents enrolled me in. And it was one of the nicer planes. Every seat had a mini screen where you can watch movies, play games, and listen to music or do whatever you want. So then I was scrolling through the list of movies trying to figure out what I wanted to watch. And I stumbled upon one of my childhood classics, Kung Fu Panda 3. And this was a movie that I watched nearly 10 years ago when I was a young child. I remember so clearly from watching the parts where Po was making dumplings with his mom to fighting the final boss Kai, like the beast with the two horns, for those who haven't watched it. It brought back great childhood memories, just that moment. And one character that stood out to me the most was Master Oogway, Poe's lifelong mentor. And Master Oogway was known to have meditated in a cave for 10 years while asking the question, who am I? And this brings me and you to this video on asking the question to ourselves, who are we? Who are we on the inside? Because it looks like as time passed, as we grow older, the answer to this question seems to slowly reveal itself as we gather more experiences here and there. But then it also feels like we're becoming more separate to our authentic selves with all of the beliefs and conditioning that are starting to get into us, that we start to wear and we start on to put on as a mask. With so many things going on with our everyday lives, it just looks like there's just more and more to worry about as we progress in life. So after sitting down and journaling, contemplating, and seeking answers to this question, I actually realized that the answer really came down to knowing what your top values are. And it's really as simple as that. It's not really rocket science. And what do I mean by values? By values, I mean knowing the types of things that makes you feel fulfilled. And it's important to know that this list of values will be different for everyone, right? Since everyone has their own unique way of living with a distinct life experience, distinct cultures, distinct genetics. And only you can find your own values. Like, you can't really outsource this to someone else. So what I'm going to be doing is going to be sharing with you some tools to help you navigate and hone in on your list of values. So then you can get a clear and defined answer of who are you authentically on the inside. But before we get into all of the tools, it's very important to understand the fundamental concept of values. Because most people misunderstand this and they get values completely wrong, and then they just get screwed up even before they get started. So there are two types of values in life. The first type of value is called level 1 values. And I like to call these types of values low conscious values because they are basically the values that are naturally born into when we come into life in society. For example, these values, you're going to be able to see them everywhere around you with everyone nearly, from like fame, the value of approval, and value of seeking external validation, right? Like when you have someone who's going to be the teacher's pet in your class, for example, or someone who's doing something just for the algorithm, as we all say. And then you also have the value of power. You can see it with dictatorships and communist societies. And control is another value. The value of certainty. So not accepting and being fearful of uncertainty. I think that's a huge one that a lot of people face. And then we have the value of wealth and money. Value of luxury, going on these holidays and only being joyful during vacations. The value of status. The value of reputation. The value of sex, something that a lot of people pursue in the Western society. Value of climaxes and sudden modes of excitement, especially during this era where technology is exploding. You can see a lot of people scrolling through social media whenever you're on the subway or whenever you're just walking on the streets. You see people plugged into their earpods and listening to music. They're valuing these climax moments, right? And then you also have like the value of good physical appearance, where these social media influencers putting on their filters and having to look professional even though it might look artificial. So those are going to be your level 1 values. And most likely, when I listed these things out, you may have started to feel some sort of guilt inside of you, or just begin to be uncomfortable and start judging these values, like maybe saying something like, I know money's bad, or saying that the value of physical appearance is bad, even though you know that you value it yourself. But then what I want you to do is hold on to this feeling and just acknowledge that it exists. Because the problem is that, like myself, like we've been watching way too many videos out there shaming us for pursuing these values, which makes it hard for us to acknowledge that we have these values, and eventually we decide to suppress it. But then watch how I name these values level 1 values, not negative values, right? Level 1 values. And in some sort of sense, these are values that we have to grow out of, we have to evolve out of in order to reach our level 2 values. The reason why we have pursued these values is because we are human. We need to feel this sense of belonging. Some need it more than others. And we need to crave this sense of security and certainty. So instead of shaming yourself for being human, I want you to let go of these beliefs and conditioning and just accept that this is the past. And in fact, you should actually even be happy that you have pursued these values of, like fame, money, luxury, sex, sudden climaxes, because then and only then can you evolve to the next level, which is something I call level 2 values. And with level 2 values, these are your higher conscious values. So level 1 values were your low consciousness values, but in level 2 is your higher consciousness values. And level 2 values, which you'll see, unlike level 1, gives you this long-term feeling of fulfillment and this peace of mind. If we think back to level 1 values for a second, you'll see that most of the time when you're living by those values, you get a certain sense of fulfillment that's temporary, maybe lasting for a couple days or a couple weeks or maximum a couple months. But then after those period, you realize that this sense of satisfaction is just gone. For example, when I was running my agency, back a couple of years ago, when I signed my first client, I was extremely happy. Like I began dancing, I began partying, my ego just boosted infinitely to levels that if I've never seen before. I thought I was better than everyone else. And I was just feeling super joyful. Like if you were to ask me to do anything back then, I would literally do anything because I was so happy. Like I thought everything was going in my way. But then fast forward to 2 days later, I've started the client onboarding process. I started to deliver my services. I didn't feel the joy anymore. I just felt the exact same as making no money and signing no clients. Like there was not this deep fulfillment that was constantly there. And this feeling was the same thing when I began posting on LinkedIn. I was super satisfied with all the numbers and the views my posts were getting. But then days later, when I did not get good views, my joy would just slip away. So then I began to realize that these were my temporary values, right? These were my level 1 values, right? So I began to evolve to level 2 values, which are your humanistic values. And these kinds of values are the ones that makes you feel noble. It makes you feel super proud. And an exercise to help you really feel into these values is, I just want you to deeply think about an activity or hobby that you have, which gives you peace or a great amount of energy after doing it. Just visualize that sensation for a second. And then now compare it to another activity that gives you a sudden burst of dopamine, or normally it might be hard to even visualize and remember the feeling because you're in such an unconscious state when you're performing these activities. But if you can, just try and remember the temporary spike of fulfillment that you get. And then afterwards, just compare those two energy together and realistically ask yourself, which one actually gave me more fulfillment? Was the temporary pleasure one even fulfillment, or was it just happiness? Because you see, fulfillment and happiness is two different things. When you're fulfilled, you're automatically happy. But then when you're happy, it doesn't mean that you're fulfilled. And another way to think about this is go back to that activity for a second. The activity where you've got a great amount of energy. So that should be the first one that you visualized. But then here's a twist now. You realize that you're the only person on this earth because something have happened, and let's just say there's no more humans and there's no external sources to validate you. Would you still be fulfilled with this activity? If you were the only person on this earth, would you still be doing those activities? And most likely, if it's a yes, then these will be one of your higher level 2 values. But then if it's an instant no, or if it's a gut feeling no, then these are not even your values, or just might be level 1 values. Your life purpose will be embodying these level 2 values, these higher conscious values. And level 2 values focuses on humanity as a large, or the environment, or animals, or something to do with reality. And the overarching theme with these values is it's about making a greater impact to the world beyond yourself. So really, in this whole process, I want to invite you to think bigger. Don't just confine yourself in a small box, because so many people do that. They only think within what they can imagine, but then they don't realize that their imagination can explode, but it's just the social conditioning which is forcing us to think in a straight line. So as you go along through your day, just begin to pay attention to hints of what these values might be to you. Like things that comes naturally to you and gives you deep fulfillment. Just start being more aware with them. So before wrapping this video, I want to give you a list of level 2 values to get your mind jogging, and also some examples of some people who might be living from these values. So one level 2 values is justice. And you can see justice can be a very broad thing from different fields. So if you think about justice in an environmental perspective, you can see environmental advocates, people who stand up for these climate issues. Those people are expressing their level 2 values on justice, or it might be social issues, right? And on the other hand, you have lawyers, true passionate lawyers. They're expressing the level 2 values in the form of presenting a case in court and fighting justice for their client. So then we can see that it's just the form of expression which is different, but then the underlying value is the same. So another value is beauty. And who might value beauty if you think about it? Artists, for example, might value beauty. Or even designers, people who are super passionate with creating these marketing content or mixing colors together. Those people value beauty. And the value of truth. One of the big examples is scientists themselves. They value the truth. That's why they conduct so many different scientific experiments, and then they can justify whether or not this hypothesis was true or not. Who else values truth? Philosophers values truth, right? So they're living on the level 2 values by questioning, existential questions and figuring this and figuring that out and deriving it through different routes. So that's the value of truth. And then we also have the value of love. And this one can be a pretty broad one, but one example that sticks into my brain is Pope Francis and his value of helping the poor and really having an impact on Christianity as a whole. The value of creativity. And a huge example you'll see is YouTubers out there, right? Like Mr. Beast with his playfulness, and Airrack, and all of these different content creators that you watch. Most likely they value creativity in some form or another. The value of excellence. Chefs, when you eat in a 5-star Michelin restaurants and you see like a fancy meal displayed in a really nice plate, and like the setting everywhere is really nice, and then you see that there's a head chef for that restaurant, that chef itself is valuing excellence. The value of uniqueness, standing out, being original, and the value of simplicity with different people in the productivity space, for example, like Ali Abdaal himself, and designers can also value simplicity, and the value of consciousness or the value of awareness. And you can see people like monks and people who frequently meditate all the time and journal themselves. They value consciousness. So I hope now you get a better taste on what these level 2 values are. And this is exactly what we're going to be guiding you through to understand your top values, like who you are genuinely on the inside. So then you can have something to start focusing and living a more aligned life with. Like, think about this as like your blueprint. And this is going to be your compass in deciding what you're going to do in different moments of your life. So in this next video, we're going to get our hands dirty and really start putting your abstract values onto paper, so then we can start working with them and come up with results to help you move closer to living a more aligned life and finding your life purpose. So I'll see you really soon.